complexity has risen in this industry.
It's made the industry really challenging, especially after COVID, because I think there were so many office managers that left dentistry. It's a mess. I mean, I'd like to have a better word for it, but it really is just a mess.
If we need specialists to figure out what network we're in, we are really in a bad state.
The killer right now for offices, we all know, is hygiene. The traditional model of dentistry is a lot more challenging than it used to be. Planning a headpiece is very critical. Otherwise, you can spend a year or two just trying to get yourself out of all of these different networks. Once you're kind of already in the PPO game, it takes you a while to get out of it if it's not the right fit.
Hi, everyone. Another edition of Nobody Told Me That. And I have another old, good friend, not old in years, but old in
Or
relationship
both.
friend with Sandi Hudson with Unlock the PPO is here with us. How you doing, Sandi?
I am great. It's been such a long time in coming. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we have lots to talk about.
Yeah,
So,
we
for
do.
those of you who are like geeking out on all the insurance stuff on my podcast, first of all, I'm glad that you're here. I'm always thankful that you listen. But Sandi is probably one of my OG geek out partners because I've known her for so long, and she rescued me years and years ago from, we can tell that story in a little bit, but she rescued me from a bad contract I was in. She helped me out, and I've always been thankful ever since. And then it's just turned into this great, like, insurance geeky relationship, then turned friendship and all of that. And you and your partner, Lisa Weber, have always been such a good source of information to your clients, my clients, and the industry at large. So if you're not familiar with Unlock the PPO, it is one of the maybe the oldest, one of the oldest negotiating companies out there. You were doing fee negotiations before it really became an industry. And just the amount of stuff that she's seen and Lisa has seen over the years on how shared networks were a little thing, direct contracts were a big thing. Now direct contracts are a little thing, shared networks are a big thing. And all along, her and I have always talked about how the complexity has risen in this industry. So she's here to help you kind of get a better hold on all of this. And of course, we're going to talk geek as well. So tune into that, right? So Sandi, when we talk about you and I being in this industry for a long time, I've had my company, I think 20 years now. How long have you and Lisa been in
Yeah,
business?
it's about 15. And you were the first person that I talked to really in this entire industry. You reached out to me, thankfully, and gave me some really great tips in the beginning of just kind of entering the dental world. But yeah, it was about 15 years ago. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and people like, there are times when we don't do the right thing, and meaning because we either screw up or we take on too much. And that was exactly what happened. I had known about them because I'd been reading them on Dental Town and their blogs. And I was like, gosh, these girls know what they're talking about. So I found myself completely in over my head with a client. And that's how that started. I called her and I said, do you mind? Do you think you could take this on? And they were like, yeah, sure. And I remember thinking, because I did negotiations too. And I remember thinking, the quality of what you guys did totally blew me out of the water. And it was very clear to me that I should not be doing it because you had a much better way of doing it. And I was like, that's it from now on. All my negotiation goes to you ladies. And that's exactly what happened. But yeah, there weren't a lot of us out there, pounding the pavement and calling the carriers and trying to get,
No.
good fees for our offices. And I feel like now everybody calls, and how are they handling with that? Like, aren't they kind of like, okay, why is everybody calling? Or
Yeah.
what's their attitude towards that?
It's made the industry really challenging, especially after COVID, because I think there were so many office managers that left dentistry or left their practices during COVID, and they're thinking, hey, this might be the time to kind of launch my own thing, which is great. But what it did create some additional challenges for is the insurance companies started really getting bombarded by a whole bunch of, instead of maybe five or six major companies out there like ours doing things, here came a whole wave of kind of individual people and not necessarily doing it in the same format. So the one thing that for those of us who have been around for a long time, at least we try to have some pretty set guidelines as far as the things that are okay to share, the things that are not okay to share, things like
Mhm.
never encouraging you to set your cash fees high artificially just for the purpose of negotiations. They need to be
Yeah.
authentic cash fees. And no, I can't share what an office down the road has with their fee schedule. And we can't use somebody else's fee schedule that you have shared, from a friend and use that as leverage to go to the insurance company. Like confidentiality is a big thing that we're very rigid about, abiding by. And so I think there was a lot of people that tried to enter this industry and either maybe didn't abide by some of those rules as well as they should have, maybe intentionally, maybe just not understanding them. But it has made the insurance carriers a lot more cautious about what is this turning into, just a lot of
Hmm.
things that are a little bit loosey goosey out there that they're not fans of. So we really tried to be sure that the rules that we follow are, you know, tied to what their regulations are, and just, to
Hmm.
make it as easy as possible to work with us. It's, become more challenging, but that's a key thing. So yeah, it's changed a lot.
But it probably, unfortunately, became a trickle down effect for you because they were like, okay, well, this is going to be difficult. And maybe if they hadn't talked to you before, they're expecting another office manager who means well, but is asking for 50% across the board increase.
Right, and just not being realistic. And you're familiar with the group of us who started ADRCC, which is really a group of us who have been in the industry, all of us, in that same range, well over 10
Hmm.
years in the industry for everybody who's involved in it. And it really was to say, look, collectively, let's all agree that there should be, we all have errors and omissions policies to say, hey, if something goes wrong, is there coverage there for our client? That's something obviously none of us intend to use, but again is just kind of a level of professionalism that says there are certain parameters that you need to have in place to be able to be a part of this industry in a responsible way. And what are those? And so collectively, even though we're all competitors technically,
Hmm.
we all serve kind of different parts of the market, and we all agreed to say, here are the minimum rules that we all agree to abide by, and that there's a level of standards that are going to be collectively agreed upon in this group. And then we're just getting ready pretty soon this year to open that up. So it's been
Okay.
6 of us company wise who have all come together to create this. We're a little over a year, maybe a year and a half probably into it. And then the next step is to say, okay, now these guidelines, we're going to open that so other people in the industry have a chance to step into that association as well. So we're
What's the name of the association again?
it's
Just
ADRCC. And so if you go to that website, if any of your, listeners go to that website, it's a really good way to just see what is the industry developing into. And if you're searching, what is a place to go that says, here's a group of people who have all agreed to a set of standards that we think is important in the industry. And, there's a lot of people who are not necessarily following all of those rules. And so
yeah.
you want to be careful about that.
It makes sense because you really do need to have best practices around this. And I think your mission, the group of you, your mission is similar to, kind of why I started Dental Revenue Network, because there is no real best practices out there on how to interact with a billing company. And for your parameters, so when you are talking about, don't share fee schedules, the whole thing about inflating your fees, if you're not actively in that corner, you don't understand why that's a bad thing. And so there are really best practices to dealing with the fee negotiations. I mean, I wrote down sharing the fees, of course, that will actually shut down the negotiations. And it's actually a contract violation for the company that shared it, right? For other practice. Have you seen that happen? I know
Yeah.
you have it. I know, can you
Yes.
share?
Yes, but we are very careful about, even if somebody sends us a fee schedule and says, I just want to show you what my friend has down here, and we'll say, I won't even open it. Like, I won't even look at it. Lisa tends to get that sometimes too, because she works with all, our startup side of things. And
Hmm.
so most startup offices, as they're building their practice, they're working somewhere else, so they know
Yeah.
what they're getting paid at another office. And so I understand the purpose of wanting to share and use that as leverage if possible, but it's such a confidentiality rule breaker with the insurance companies. And it's just something, we said we won't do. So we shut that down. But, realize not everyone is doing that. Sometimes people will do that, but then if somebody goes incorrectly to an insurance company with that information trying to work on your behalf and the
Yeah.
insurance company sees that, does it actually work against you rather than for you? So
Yeah,
That's a
that's
one big one to sidestep. Don't do
and the whole thing about starting your fees high, there's claim history. Like they can go
that.
back and see that. So if you jack up the
Right.
fees before, how long should they have been at their fees
Well,
before they call?
we do a fee analysis as part of our services. And so we say, definitely make any changes that you want to make. That's fine to do that. But
Hmm.
we require all of our clients, like once they've made any changes that they want to make to their cash fees, we require them to input them in their software and then give us a new copy of them. Because
Okay.
that way, when we go to the insurance companies with a copy of their current cash fees, now they may be relatively new, they may have just made changes in the last month or so, but we don't want somebody saying, well, here's what I'm going to charge, but then they don't actually do it. And so that's why we always get a copy from the software because we know they have had to actually put them in their software and create a completely new fee schedule before we take those to the insurance companies. Now, some company may say, well, we've looked historically and these look higher than what we're seeing on your claims. And we'll say, well, this was the date that they were changed. So if it's an authentic cash fee change, it's okay. But you may
Mm-hmm.
not see the results of that as much this time around. It may, they're going to be watching that history. Something else that more insurance companies are doing is they're actually cross-checking claims to say if you're saying this is what you've been submitting and you haven't, if down the road 3 months they can look at a claim and these are not the fees that you're saying this is what you charge but you're not, they have the right to look at that and come back to you and say those are not really the cash fees that match what you
Yeah.
submitted. So you just want to be authentic about it. You want to at least be submitting something that is truthfully what you are planning to submit on claim forms going forward. And the insurance companies have caught on to that. I mean, there were people who were actively promoting for offices to do that, actually
Wow.
saying you need to bump up your cash fees artificially high just for the purposes of negotiation. So,
Uh,
insurance companies are aware that there's people out there not doing things the right way, and that's not going to be beneficial in the long run.
well, and I don't think a lot of people realize like the insurance companies are on Dental Town. They're on Facebook. Like they're in every one of these groups because, and you may not see the user Delta Dental, but there are
Right,
so many
right.
providers that are not providers, but consultant dentists or dentists that are in admin or even just, people that work in the relations department. They're in these groups. And so I always am like, you got to be very careful. Don't just follow like the latest advice that sounds great. You got to really
Mhm,
vet it.
mhm.
Now, you said something earlier about how, Lisa handles the startups and you handle the existing, the veteran dentists, and all of that. So, what is the big difference then between your conversations with your offices versus Lisa's? Like, is hers more labor intensive because it's startup and it's a brand new schedule plus credentialing? I mean, how does that differ?
Yeah, so it's just kind of different pieces. So Lisa and Delicia are on our startup side, and then me and Brenda are on the established side. So the way that we work it is, if you're a startup, the beauty of that situation is you get to do it right from the beginning. So
Yes.
you're not cleaning up a mess. So from our side of things, for an established office, a lot of times we're trying to unravel things that might have been good choices 5 or 10 years ago, or maybe not, but for whatever reason the choices are probably not working now the same way they might have at one point. So we're really trying to look at everything, looking at the history of the practice for the last year, saying, okay, what did you really bill out? How often did you bill out each of these top codes? What really matters for us to go after on negotiations? Who's paying you well, who's not paying you so well? Putting all the fee schedules in order, best to worst, looking at how much volume you have with each one of those, and then just figuring out a good game plan from that point on. For startups, it's going to be more of determining, number one, what are your cash fees going to be, because you have to
Yeah.
set the original ones, and that's always a little stressful for a new dentist opening their practice for the first time.
Sure.
And then identifying what do you think your top codes are going to be. So for most practices, if it's a general dentist, it's usually about 30 codes that'll make up about 90% of an
Hmm.
office's production. So on the established side, we're narrowing it down to about 30 codes. Specialists are going to be less than that, but 30 at most. Well, as a startup, you're trying to determine, what do I think my top codes are going to be without having
Hmm.
any history with your practice yet. You haven't even opened your
Yeah.
door. So you're trying to, evaluate that. And so that's always a challenge because, Lisa will get a list sometimes that has a top 100 and it's like, no, no, we need to get this down to probably 50 at most as a startup.
Yeah.
And what are the things that you don't want to leave out, of course, but then when you start really thinking about it, how many times in the last year have I actually done that? Good chance that a lot of those codes are really not going to be as important. So when you really think about 30 codes, 90% of your office's production,
Yeah.
that's what you really need to be narrowing it down to. And then that's all, of course, the new credentialing involved with that. That's a lot of the paperwork side of things on the startup side. But also, looking at what are all of the shared network agreements out there. And as a startup, again, the beauty of it is we know what all of those, shared network agreements are. So being able to put the paperwork into place to either use ones that you may think, hey, I don't mind if that insurance company picks up under this fee schedule. So that's fine. We might just let that one go. But for things that are ones that you need to opt out of,
Yeah.
and I might pause on that just to give a little definition because I think sometimes offices don't realize there's a difference between a termination and an opt out. A termination meaning I'm eliminating an entire contract. An opt out just means you're telling one company that you don't want them to allow a different company to use their fee schedule. So
Hmm.
most of these shared network agreements you can opt out of, but not all of them. Some of them you don't have a choice on. But the burden is always on you to opt out. The way these work is you're automatically opted in to those shared network agreements. And if you want to opt out, you have to be the one to take the initiative to opt out. It should be the reverse
Yeah.
of that. We all know it should be different,
Right.
but that's not the way it is. And that ship has sailed. I mean, there's no way that that's going to change. Um,
Well, there's been some, I think Florida passed a law, but it only, again, it's self-funded plans. I don't think it applies
mhm,
to the whole, like a national network, but they did pass, and I think maybe even Illinois did the same thing where there has to be an actual signature for of the doctor for an opt-in to these
mhm,
additional networks, but it's a fresh law. We haven't really seen much about it, and I was told by a carrier that this really doesn't even apply because how many networks are only state, specific.
right.
And so that I was like, it sounds great, but we have to see how it's going to play out.
Yeah. So far, the
And
little bit of progress in that area, I've not really seen have any kind of practical
yeah,
application so far. Maybe that will change. But I think it's just really important to realize the thing that's been so hard for offices is that those shared network agreements, they weren't created by the dentist. They were created by the insurance companies, with these third party agreements. And some of them might actually be fine for an office and some may not work for an office. But there are things that the dentist never was a part of creating. And so they're just having to react to all of that. And so, the insurance companies kind of like those shared network agreements when they work to their benefit, but they don't like them so much when, dentists want to use them to their benefit. And so
right.
it's a tricky thing because they can't just work one way. If you're going to implement these and create this kind of chaotic system out there, it has to be something that doctors understand and that they can choose to either participate with or not participate with if it's to their advantage or not. But it's very complex now. I mean, the
Yeah,
last 5 years, it is just, I always tell people this is all we do. Like, we don't do any other kinds of consulting. We don't, as you know, we don't do billing and coding. I tell all
yeah,
those people to call you. So the thought of like, that's all we do and we can barely keep up,
right,
with how
right.
crazy it is. So,
Well, it really is amazing because it's not just us that are confused. The carriers are confused.
mhm,
So at the most recent NADP meeting, National Association of Dental Plans, you and I were sitting next to each other
mhm,
in a panel discussion of leasing
mhm,
networks. And I think one of them was like, yeah, we kind of did this to ourselves and, we keep making it more complex. And I think I've sat in two or three of those throughout my time. And that is pretty much the consensus. Like it keeps getting more complicated. And one thing that was said, and I don't think she meant it in the way, but it just didn't come out right. And I think it hit us wrong was when she said basically people were like why is it so difficult, and it's like, well, that's what our secret sauce is. And we were like, we don't care about your secret sauce, or your secret sauce is making things really nasty out there. Like, stop with your secret sauce. And I understand it's totally profitable for the carriers because they don't have to put boots on the ground, and they automatically their reach is huge now just by these strokes of the pen.
mhm,
But it's our administrative burden is really increasing because of
Yeah.
this. I mean, if we need specialists to figure out what network we're in, we are really in a bad
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
And you even niched yourself down, you and Lisa, to not dealing with multi locations. Like
Mhm.
this is just
Yes.
single locations, and
Yes.
you still like have your huge like Excel
Yes.
sheets
Yes.
and maps and all
Yes.
that stuff. So I
Yes.
know you and I were both just sitting there like, what are we listening to in this panel?
Oh, it just makes my heart rate go. You saw me after that. It's just, I'm all about, look, everybody can make their own choices. And insurance companies have the right to have their business model that works for them too. And I'm
Sure.
perfectly fine with that. But there is becoming such a lack of transparency sometimes where it's like, let's just be honest about the rules here and let's be honest about how all this really works, just so that doctors can navigate what they need to do for their choices. Some people are doing it on their own and they're well versed in this and they're out there on social media and they're paying attention. But I would say for 95% of offices, managing all of this shared network piece is something that would be very, very difficult to do on your own.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm constantly reading, keeping up on stuff, and you came over to Dental Revenue Network and posted the latest update, and I was like, I missed that somehow. And there are many things that I miss when I go to read your blog. I'm like, man, I missed that announcement and this announcement. It takes being subscribed to every newsletter, reading press releases, seeing little blog publications that you don't think are important. They publish it on a blog, and you're like, how am I supposed to keep up with this? And they're typically they do send an email or some sort of notification, but if the right person doesn't understand how important it is, where does that go? So it's hard if you and I are struggling to stay on top of this stuff, and me more than you, because you obviously have it down pat. I don't know how the traditional biller in an office who's busy doing everything that they're
Mhm.
doing is going to be able to keep on top of it. So I tell people all the time, your blog, your Facebook pages, unlock the PPO, check it out. If they're on Dental Town, check out Dental Town, because you all are always giving great advice over there. And that's really like, I think you built your business on number one, referrals, because your name is so well spoken and well regarded. But Dental Town, like you were giving away free advice at a time when many people were like, why are you giving away so much advice?
Yeah.
And I think it worked for you.
It did. And honestly, I started posting there because, I'm married to a dentist and I was this front office person and I was looking for somebody to help me. And there was
Mhm.
nobody doing that. And in this industry, dental revenue cycle didn't exist as a term really back then. I mean, it
Yeah,
just wasn't
no, there was
a
yeah,
thing.
that was nothing.
Yeah.
RCM was like, what is that?
Yeah. And so I was trying to find somebody to help me and it just didn't exist. And so I just started posting like, hey, basically I made every mistake possible, I feel like, and here's what I learned. And so let me just try to save other people from making the same mistakes that I was making. And some of it worked and some of it was more challenging. And I just learned a lot. And so that posting was just, and then I realized nobody's doing this. I wonder why nobody is doing this. And
Yeah.
so we just kind of launched from there. And Lisa and I actually met through Dental Town, which is crazy.
Oh,
We became official business partners before we had ever met in person. So it was,
really? I didn't
yeah.
know that.
So it
Wow.
was kind of a crazy thing. And,
Yeah.
it's worked out to be a great partnership, but that's where we connected. And so I love the environment on Dental Town because it really is dentists who are they're not so interested in some of the Facebook groups that get a little bit overwhelming and are kind
Hmm.
of a lot of commercial pieces to some of that.
Yeah.
And, I
It's
guess
pretty
that's
bad.
everywhere, but I feel like, Dentaltown is good about really trying to keep it more education focused a little bit more and makes people, at the very least, makes people be more transparent when they're posting about, what do they get out of, is there any kind of reward to this? And that was one of the things that back to our original thing we were talking about is, that was something you told me from the beginning was you need to be really careful as you enter this industry of understanding who might expect something back from you with referrals. And so we didn't know anything more about the dental world at all from the consulting side of things. But because you told me that, we created a policy from the very beginning that just said we'll never give referral fees and we won't ever take referral fees. That was just
Yeah.
it's been our company policy ever since. And I was so glad you told me that from the beginning because we've had lots and lots of companies over the years say, hey, if we send all of our business to you, can we get this or whatever? And so I've always been very thankful that you gave us that thought before we needed the response to somebody. So it was just something we put in place and we've not ever backtracked from that. It's a bit of a wild west out there,
Yeah.
with who's paying for what and who's paying for
Yeah.
postings and knowing is this true or is somebody getting a kickback from it. There's a lot out there that does give dentists every right to question the advice that they're being given. So,
It's disappointing for sure. I mean, we are aware, me, you, and a couple other billers are aware of some bad information as one particular source. And because, there's money exchanged, this person is prominently featured on several Facebook groups. And, when he makes a post, people think that it's 100% accurate. Meanwhile, on the back end, there's a small group of us having to deal with the audits that come from it. And it's very, very frustrating. And I think I told you that way back when because I did not realize how much pay to play was going on even way back then. And social media wasn't even a huge thing. It was
right.
just blogs at that point. So that even made it worse. But there were people who would, call you up and offer huge money to push their product. And it suddenly became very clear to me why my doctor was getting pitched what they were getting pitched because you could see the companies that came out with huge budgets for referrals. And here I am as a baby consultant not making a ton of money when you first get out. It's very attractive to sell your soul for $1,000 a client or 1,500 a client. And I remember thinking, wow, this is like so ethically weird. And I made that same thing. If I have a sponsorship, it's disclosed. If I'm getting money, it's disclosed. But it feels really good in the front of the room to say, these people don't pay me anything. I just like them. And I think that's also why people were like, what is that unlock the PPO you were talking about? Because I would say they give me nothing. I mean, and I have to be able to sleep at night. And I think there's a lot of people that are very much like us on that, but there's a small subset that would love to take a lot of money in order to use their big voice. And I think that's always going to be, it's not just our industry, a lot. So gotta buyer beware. It's always buyer beware out there. When you decided though not to deal with multiple locations though, tell us why, because all I'm hearing from the voices in the back, because I can hear it, like the crowd is like, wow, but that's the big money. Sometimes, though, makes you think about it. So, what was
Yeah.
your reasoning?
Well, a few things. One is the true like DSO side of things. That's just not where our passion is. And some of that's probably because, I am married to a dentist and I like the idea of advocating for the solo dentist
Yeah.
in just our world. I think solo dentists can be competitive, if not do this better than DSOs, because for the way we do things, to be so precise with all of the opt outs, all of the things that you have to do to map out your strategy, it is very, very difficult to do that on a scale of multiple locations and multiple dentists because you're continually bringing new dentists in, transitioning new dentists out. To be able to do it, I think, as well as we do it for the individual dentist, you just can't scale that the same way.
Okay.
And I think it becomes so time consuming. Like, we've had offers of, will you just come work for my DSO? Will you just come, just do our stuff? And even when we questioned, like penciled it out, it's like you can't afford to pay us to do that at the level that we do it for the solo practice. It just
Got it.
doesn't, it doesn't work. And not to say there's anything wrong with the DSO market. Most of our competitors, I think we're the only ones who don't work in the DSO market, pretty much.
I would say so, yeah.
But we also liked the idea of, Lisa and I being hands on. We work very closely with either we're working with the client directly or, we each have one other consultant that works with us and they are. So either way, we're very involved with all of our client base. And I think it served us well. People have always thought we were crazy for not going for the bigger groups, but this is our individual doctors that we like. And we really do
Mhm.
like advocating for keeping that going as long as we can and doing it well. And the startup piece that Lisa does and Delicia, I think honestly you would be hard pressed to find anybody who can match the service that they do on the startup side because I think that's actually the there are some of our other companies doing this who really prefer not to do the startups as much because it's a lot of hand holding. It
Yeah.
really is explaining what are shared network agreements from the ground. It's just a lot of things to be learning as a new practice owner getting ready to open. A lot of things you would never learn in dental school. So it's just a lot of
Right.
educational pieces. And Delicia, they're just amazing at that part. So I think that's a little bit of a niche that we've really enjoyed too. But yeah.
Well, and hats off to you guys for that because one thing, working with so many of these billing company owners, there is that whole scope creep that comes up because
Mhm.
you're so good at one. So somebody asks you to
Right,
do
right,
another job and you're like, well, I could do that. And then all
right.
of a sudden you're doing four things that you kind of like instead of the one you really like. And so I think it's good you've been able to say that. But I know there have been former shared clients between us where I'll say, hey, are you going back to Sandy and Lisa for this and for that? And they're like, oh no, we can't now. They won't work with
They
us
won't
because
take
now we're two locations. And I'm like, oh yeah. And I can hear like the sorrow because they're like, oh, now we got to find another company.
I know. We do
that,
two
that must be
doctors.
hard.
We don't do more than one location. We'll do up to two doctors. So a partnership or somebody with an associate. We will, and we actually, even after COVID, we carved that out for a while where we wouldn't even do two doctors. We just got so overwhelmed after COVID.
Hmm.
I thought when COVID hit, people are going to be like, I'm not spending any money. We were really prepared to kind of have to hunker down a bit, thinking
Yeah,
dentists are not going
same.
to care about spending money at all. And it was the opposite. It was like everybody used that downtime to be like, well, I'm going to work on my practice. I can't see patients. I guess I'm going to work on my practice instead. And so we were just overwhelmed for a couple of years in there. So now, things kind of stabilized. So two doctors is the most we'll do.
Yeah. Well, and one thing, so let's talk about these shared networks
Yeah.
because, oh man, whenever a doctor is saying to me, like, what's the most difficult part of the job? If I say, are you in network? Yeah, I said, well, then managing your networks is the hardest. I don't even have to think twice. The second thing is just, are you getting the write-offs correct? And is the person who's entering in, is that correct? But without a doubt, it's maintaining it. And I say to people, if you see that there's a fee that's different than what you think it should be, don't just kind of go, huh, that's weird, and go on. Like, all full stop, pull out similar EOBs, make sure, because if you're somehow assigned a wrong fee schedule, it is a disaster to catch up on. I mean, honestly, we're talking months, spreadsheets, detailed reports, all sorts of stuff. But I know that you probably have one or two tricks you can share on how to minimize this. Now, one situation that we talked about in the pregame was a doctor wants to get out of network and does everything right. And then all of a sudden, 2 or 3 months later, they find they're right back in the network they tried to get out of.
Mhm.
And then the other scenario, which we didn't talk about, is a doctor leaves a network because they're expecting to get picked up
Mhm.
by another network because somebody told them, don't worry, that's in the network, you'll get picked up. And then they don't get picked up. And then they're like freaking out.
Mhm.
So, do you have advice on either of those scenarios, both of those scenarios?
Well, for people moving more fee for service, and I think we all know that's the big buzzword right now is,
Fee for service.
everybody is wanting to go fee for service and or more fee for service, even if it's not completely fee for service. So that's the trend.
Mhm.
And I would say, just pausing just a second before we get there, I think just for dentists who are feeling like, hey, I would love to go fee for service. Everybody seems like they're going fee for service, but truly everybody's not going fee for service. So to kind of calm some of that a little bit, we're definitely seeing more dentists pull the trigger than ever did before. The
Mhm.
hygiene scenario is very difficult right now. So certainly there is a lot of that. But if you feel like it seems like everybody around me is fee for service except me. That's not true either. So, kind of take that a little bit with a grain of salt. But
I'm so
it,
glad you said that because there's so much peer pressure out there, and doctors are feeling like, well, everybody's going out and they make it sound so easy. They're not completely going out with everything. Like you said, there's mixed participation. Or I hear also from the carriers too, like as many people as going out of network, you still have huge DSOs every graduation signing up more dentists. So it's not
Mhm.
necessarily like there's been this huge flip in the market. It's ebbing and waning all the
Yeah,
time. So
yeah,
sorry, I'm so glad you said that because I think the peer pressure is rough out there.
it is. And it's easy to feel like I'm the only one who doesn't have this figured out. And that's so not the case. I mean,
Yeah.
it just isn't. But for offices who are trying to get out of network with a company, the key with that is you need to know the shared network piece before you drop, not after. because it's going to take you anywhere from, 30 to 90 days to get out of network with a company after you send the termination.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you drop out and you're thinking, okay, now I'm out, I'm done. And then a month later, you're picked back up again by somebody else. Well, now it's going to take you 30 to 60 days to unravel yourself from that shared network agreement. And just when you've done that, who knows, maybe there's another one sitting there to pick up. There's companies that we could easily have to do 5 or 6 opt outs for in the
Wow.
practice. That's very common. So,
Wow.
what you really want to do is you want that all mapped out before you make your decision, because you want those opt outs to be in place before you send the termination, so that when you drop that, in theory, now again, that means everybody needs to have done what they are supposed to do with those opt outs. So, don't
Yeah.
just send them and assume it's good. Once you send them, you need to follow up. It's a pain. I mean, there's no way around it. It's just a
Yeah.
hassle. But you really need to follow up and make sure you have the confirmation that those opt outs are in place. And then that way, if that's all mapped out and you've done that all proactively, then when you go to get your termination done and you're out of network, then you should actually stay out of network. But you need to know, who does this company have shared network agreements with? And how do I opt out of those and get those
Yeah.
done ahead of time? Because otherwise, it's a year later, and not only have you not made progress, sometimes you go backwards.
Yeah.
Because for most companies, not all, but most companies, a direct contract will override shared network agreements. So let's say you have a company, you're just like, I'm done, I'm ready to be out. You drop that contract, and let's say they have a shared network agreement with a company that's actually an even lower paying fee schedule. Well, now you're back in network, but you're getting paid even worse than you were before. It's a very demoralizing thing when you get to that kind of situation, because now you've actually gone down in fees rather than up. So that planning ahead piece is very critical. Otherwise, you can spend a year or two just trying to get yourself out of all of these different network agreements.
Theoretically, they should be on like a carrier's website. Like, here's our partners, or here are our network partners, or
Yeah,
no?
they
I
should
don't
be.
know.
And some of
You're
them
looking at me
are.
like, no.
Some of them are very transparent, but you also just kind of have to know what you're looking for. Like, I think the gap in there is somebody deciding, I'm ready to be out of network with this company. They just want the end result. But then having to see, it's this big web, and knowing, well, where do I even go to find that information? And if I do want to opt out, how do I opt out? Is there an email? Do I fax it? Is there a form? Do I send a letter? How do I
Yeah.
do that? And if you're going to opt out, you don't necessarily just want to go company by company. Like, if you need an opt out with this company, they might have shared network agreements with 5 or 6 different companies. Well, if you're going to send it, do you, do you want to do all of them, or just some of them, or
Hmm.
which ones make sense? And so you don't want to be sending a new opt out every time you go to do this if you can avoid it. Just ideally, you're looking globally at your practice and saying, here's what works, here's what doesn't. For the things that don't work, let's get all of those opt outs in place. And then let's start working our way up the list and start working from the bottom payer and working our way up to getting out of things, until we've got it narrowed down to the fee schedules that feel are workable.
Wow.
So it's a mess. I mean, I'd
It
like to
is a
have a better word
mess.
for it, but it really is just a mess.
I'm understanding what you're saying on a high level, but when I think of, if I had to go back to my office right now and do it, I would not want to do it. Like, this would make me think of hiring a company or like quitting, because
It
I'm not
is.
cut out to do this, because it's so much detailed work, and then tracing and
Yeah.
tracking and phone tags and email tags, and you have to track all of that. And that's why I said, even back then, when it wasn't as complex as it is now, when I saw how you did it, I was like, whoa, like, I'm done. Like, I
Mhm.
can't do this anymore, because here I am thinking I'm doing a good job with my sticky notes tracking everything. No, 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 no.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that. Wow, how silly was I? But it is also demoralizing. I've talked to a lot of managers who tried it, and they were like, oh, I wasn't able to get any traction. But
Mhm.
they came out of the gate, 50% fee schedule across the board. We want it
Mhm.
done by, like, all this stuff. And that's just not how the game
Mhm.
is played, I guess, if you want to
Right.
call it a game. It's just not the way to do it. And honestly, for all the work that has to be done in the practice, this is something that you don't want to spend hours on. Let
Mhm.
somebody else do it that could do it faster. It's the same thing as payroll. Like, I could do payroll, but it'll take me much longer now because I haven't done it in so long and somebody else does it better. Like, so
Yeah.
it's just easier to do that. It does feel like to me this shared networks arrangement is accelerating. Like there's
Mhm.
almost no used to be I would feel like maybe there was once a year there would be a change in something, but I feel like now every couple months I'm getting a new
Yes.
notification of a new agreement. Like are they just basically whenever it suits them doing it? It's not like a
Yeah.
6 month, 3 month, it's just whenever.
No, they're just rolling out all the time. And it's every time we get one of those, we're like, oh, because, we try to post, like you've seen that, like, okay, here's, if this is your situation, do this. If this is your situation, do this kind of a thing. And then we go back through, at any given time, we probably have 100 active clients. So we're going back through every account then and saying, okay, of our current clients, who do we need to backtrack through so that we were getting them the correct paperwork? It's just an ongoing thing, every couple months, like you said, we're getting a new one of them. And really, Delta's the only one left. If you want to be with Delta, you sign a joint
Yeah.
contract. There are not shared network agreements, but pretty much everybody else out there now has shared network agreements with at least some of their networks. It may not be all of them, but
Yeah.
at least some of
Well, and Delta has always said that's not their jam. They don't
them.
want to do that. And the one thing that I hear all the time, and I know is incorrect, but I want an expert to say it, is
Mhm.
there's this big thing out there that Delta never ever negotiates.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty sure that's not true. I know it's not true because I hear all the time from audience members who are very happy to speak up and say, no, that's not true. I just negotiated this. And you could just see the what looks.
Mhm.
But where is that came from that Delta never negotiates? And
Well, it is very rare. We
okay.
rarely see Delta negotiating, and they certainly are not doing negotiations in any market that they don't have to.
Yeah, of
There's going
course,
to
of
be a
course.
pocket where if they're short of providers, or sometimes it's just really good timing of an office where let's say that three offices in their area just dropped and said, we've had enough, we're dropping. It might just be really good timing, and they're like, okay, we can't lose another provider. There's certain circumstances, but it is rare. We rarely see Delta.
But on the startup side, Lisa is able to get
No,
that going or not even.
not oftentimes not. Not
Okay.
not with Delta.
Okay.
Again, sometimes they will. More likely with a specialist than a general dentist, if they're needing a specialist in a certain area. On rare occasions too, if they're, even in a state that is not allowed to move from PPO to premier status, there may be a case where they say they'll override that and make an exception if they need somebody bad enough. If they're going to have to drop Delta entirely, they may entice to say, well, okay, we'll give you something with
Hmm.
the premier rates in between. That's another thing, though, the offices should be really aware of is the whole thing of moving from PPO to premier. It varies state by state. So there's lots and lots of people out there who will either say, no, you can't be premier only, or people who are adamant that you can be premier only.
Well, hold
And
on
it
a
just
second, Sandy.
depends.
Hold on a second, because
Yeah.
this is something that maybe if you're a new dentist or a new manager, you're not familiar. So with Delta, there's different levels. Premier is sort of like the grand tier, the grand old tier of Delta, where higher fee schedules. Typically, those doctors have had those fee schedules for a long
Mhm.
time, and there's some states where you can't even get new premier fee
Right.
schedule, or is that pretty consistent now across the country?
No, there's some states you can and some states you cannot.
Okay,
So
all right.
everybody still has a premier fee schedule technically. It's just that if you're in a state that requires you to take PPO with premier, then your premier fee schedule is essentially irrelevant because they're going to almost always pay you on the PPO rates anyway. So you might have a premier fee schedule and you might have it in your system, but they're just not going to pay you on it.
So that's
So
Premier plus PPO, and you're required to take both. And then where does preferred is preferred the PPO? Is that what the same thing
well,
we're
and
talking
that'll depend. Most states are going to be more just like PPO and Premier is for just like generally speaking.
about? Okay.
Now, for an office though, and this is why it's really important for especially some of your listeners who are a little bit more in our age range. Let's say you're in California and you like I've always heard you can't move to Premier only anymore. And that's true with new contracts. But if you signed your contract prior to the date change in California, you're under the old version of the contract, not the new version, which does still allow you to drop PPO and move to Premier only. So you need to be aware. Now, if you just opened a practice in the last, couple years in California, then no, you're out of luck. But just be aware that for most of the states that have dropped your ability to move from PPO to Premier, you still want to know, if you've been around for a while, you want to know, when did that date change and when did I sign my contract? Because there's a lot of offices in California that we've moved to Premier only status, because even though it's not been allowed for a decade, just because their practice has been around for 15 years. And,
Oh, that's
the
nice. Boy,
different,
they must have been super grateful for that.
yeah. And also keep in mind, though, that Delta is not tied to your tax ID number as far as your participation goes, like most companies are. It's attached to the individual dentist. So let's say I'm a 50 something dentist in California, and it's like this with many other states too, but just using California as an example. If you have the ability to move to Premier only because of when you signed your contract, that's relevant for you individually. But if you sell your practice, if you bring on an associate, their participation, the new buyer, the associate, that's their participation is attached to them as a dentist, just like it's attached to the owner as a dentist. So it's
Um,
not by tax ID number. Now that creates many other challenges that we could
yeah.
spend a whole hour
Oof.
talking about. But if you can preserve Premier only participation for you, it's something you might want to at least look at. You just have to know it's not going to transition to anybody else in your practice. I mean, unless they also sign prior to that
Right.
rule change.
Okay. So there are states though where if they can't get Premier because they're newer or whatever,
Mhm.
do you sign them up for the other networks too that
It's
they're
mostly
on
going to
or
be they're going to have to take PPO. It's
okay.
either take PPO or stay completely out of network in most cases. Although I'll say it used to be that if you are starting a practice, you were going to take Delta. You might take nothing but Delta, but you
Hmm.
always took Delta.
Yeah.
And that we've seen a shift in. We do have many more startup offices who are saying, I'm staying out of network. Delta PPO fees in some states are really, really hard fees to
Yeah.
work with.
Yeah.
So, offices who are or dentists who are saying, I'm going to keep my associate position 1 day a week and not take Delta instead, just as a way to have, knowing they're going to have slower growth by not taking Delta. But we never used to hear that ever happening. So,
Yeah.
people are being more selective now. One thing I wanted to go back to that you asked me, and then I kind of jumped over to a different topic. You asked me about the shared network agreements. What about the reverse? If you are
Yes.
trying to drop something and you're trying to move it to a third party, what if they don't pick up? And so I think there's some good disclaimers we should, talk about with that, is that when you have a direct contract, that's your written guarantee. That's how you know you're going to be a network. You know you're going to be a network with all of their networks. You don't have to wonder, no gaps in participation. That's the easiest, simplest way to participate, and really the preferable way. If we
Hmm.
can get a good direct contract, we would always prefer to put people still in direct contract. Absolutely. But then there's a question of, well, what if a shared network agreement is substantially higher and this insurance company is not willing to negotiate? So then if you're like, well, hey, I can't make the direct contract work anymore. I've already decided I'm getting out of that. The fees are just not workable. But if that company were to be picked up by a higher paying shared network agreement, are you okay with that? If you're not, you have to do the opt out thing we already talked about. But
Hmm.
if you are okay with that, you just have to know that there are no written guarantees with any third party pickup. So nobody's promising you anything. So
Right.
you just have to know going into it, there is nothing in writing that says any third party administrator has to pick you up. Now, usually when they pick up, it's just an automatic thing. It just automatically happens after a few months. You're going to be out of network while that transition is happening, typically, not always, but usually.
Hmm.
Some insurance companies are starting to get more deliberate about penalizing dentists who drop direct contracts.
Yeah.
So, there are some companies that will say, well, if you drop this direct contract, hey, if you hadn't had that direct contract, we'll pick up under a third party. But if you drop the direct contract, we're going to make you wait 12 months or whatever the amount of time is. And it's just a way, of course, to deter people from doing just that. So
Yeah.
you have to decide, is it worth it? There's always risk involved when you move to any kind of shared network agreement. There's never going to be a guarantee with that. But the question is the fee schedule you're on workable for you anyway? And what we look at with our clients is saying, if you drop something because just this fee schedule isn't workable, regardless of if the third party picks up or not, the fee schedule you're on is just not something you can work with. we'll run some different retention scenarios that say, let's say you drop this contract and 100% of your patients stay with you and you collect at the out of network rates. How much more are you going to collect? But there's a good chance that some people may have limited benefits if you drop and you might lose some patients when that happens.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
what if you lose 10% of your patients, but for the 90% who stay, you collect up to your cash fees? What if you lose 20%? What if you lose 30%? We'll just go through some different scenarios, and then you can determine, is the decision really if a third party picks me up or not? Then that's maybe an added bonus if that happens, and then that's a fee schedule that's workable for you and you're okay with that, then that's great. But does it really allow you to even keep this direct contract regardless? Because, the killer right now for offices, we all know, is hygiene. Is just
Yeah.
the traditional model of dentistry is a
Yeah.
lot more challenging than it used to be, because when hygienists were $40 instead of $70 an hour, or were, $60 instead of 90, or, whatever,
Yeah.
every market in the country has seen crazy changes. And so that, kind of hygiene driven business model has become far more challenging on the PPO side. This PPO fees have not kept pace with what we're seeing with, hygienists, and not just hygienists, other overhead and other things that have changed, since COVID as well. But that being the biggest piece
Yeah.
for sure.
And
So
one thing about the hygiene model, and we had talked about this, I think, on a previous phone call, just when we were catching up, is that there's a lot of hygiene instructors out there who are kind of saying, to the hygienists who are in the field, stop it because you're kind of killing our business. And I think I see what they're saying, and it sounds
mhm,
dramatic, but it's really not if you think about it. The amount of doctors I've talked to who have said, I couldn't find a hygienist. I have been
mhm,
hygienist free for a year and a half. And honestly, I'm doing fine. I'm probably never going to have a hygienist unless, whatever X reasons. And it's actually spurred some conversations, some of my strategy calls. I'm really a restorative dentist who does hygiene for our existing offices. How can we do this? And the biggest issue for them is they now can afford to leave networks because
yeah,
they're realizing that they have a different way of being profitable. It's just wild to me that we're seeing business models in dentistry change. Because when you and I were, the
mhm,
receptionist, everything revolved around hygiene.
yeah,
Hygiene schedule was full because then it drove the
mhm,
restorative. And if anybody left without an appointment, we were calling them and sending them postcards to get them in the schedule.
right,
And now I'm talking to doctors who are like, you know what, if they don't need to come see me 2 times a year, I'm going to tell them once every 10 months because that's what my state practice act says I have to see them. That's
mhm,
frequency because my hygiene schedule, I have no room for them. So
mhm,
even the traditional 2 times a year, if the patient doesn't need it, the doctor's like, whatever. But then you've
mhm,
got a patient who's like, I need my 2 times a year. Like,
right,
so there's a push there. But I definitely am hearing, and my other colleagues that are speaking too, we're hearing from a lot more doctors that are like, you know what, it's not that we want to go hygiene free. We have to because there's nobody. We can't afford it. And one of the attendees at the insurance extravaganza was saying that in Nevada, it's 110 an hour in Reno for hygiene. That's insane. I
mhm,
mean, that's crazy. So I appreciate that the hygienists have been underpaid before hygiene. Maybe they were underpaid in certain markets, but this is unsustainable.
it
And
is.
if you're dealing with insurance reimbursements that aren't working, I don't
Mhm,
know how you continue to lose money
right.
in that manner. So I did want to ask you something though. Have you ever had a call, an exploratory call with someone who wanted to, do smart participation, all this kind of stuff, but then you're really listening to them going, why are you wanting to even go in network? Like, are there some people that come to you and their businesses are thriving and all of that? And you're like, why are you even doing this? Do you ever have those conversations with doctors?
Yeah, because sometimes, that PPOs have traditionally been the path of growth. If you're wanting growth, insurance has been, the avenue. And there's times where it makes sense, especially the offices particularly that we work with to add PPOs are going to be, let's say it's a newer owner and they bought out a retiring dentist and it's grossing 400 or 500,000 a year. They bought it kind of in place of a startup, really.
Okay.
And it's somebody who was an older dentist, hadn't raised fees in forever, was coasting the last few years, and they're now, a new owner. They need more growth coming with it. They need a jump start. So a lot of times that's that smaller practice that needs, and it may not be that they're going to be PPO oriented forever, but just kind of at least getting things jump started for a few years and getting some heavier growth coming. But then sometimes, we'll get offices who are grossing 1 million and they want to add an associate and they're looking for a path for growth.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
those I always recommend a lot more caution on because, you've already got a good, healthy practice. And PPOs are not a quick fix. You're not just adding something and then, your phone's ringing off the hook 2 weeks later. It's
Right.
still slow growth, So, and a lot of offices who are too busy and they're getting ready to hire an associate, I'm always happy when we can talk to those people before they add the associate because a lot of times I'll say you're better off thinking about eliminating some lower paying PPOs and
Yes.
actually shrinking your practice intentionally
Yes.
rather than hiring somebody new to take rates that are not only not workable for you, but now you're paying somebody for
Yes.
rates that weren't even workable for you. And now you've got a salary
Right.
on top of that. So there are, I think, a lot more dentists who are at that fork in the road where they're like, I'm too busy. I don't want to keep growing. I need help. But instead of hiring that additional dentist, they're going the other direction and saying, I'd
Yeah.
rather cut 2 or 3 PPOs than think about adding in a whole other person into the mix. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of cases where it's like, I'm pretty well known, I think, for telling people, not that we're trying to turn down business, but don't hire us. That
Right.
we're not what you need right now. You
Yeah.
need to do some other things probably. So yeah, it's being careful not to, because it's not easy to unwind once you've made that step.
For
Once you're kind of
sure.
already in the PPO game, it takes you a while to get out of it if it's not the
Yeah.
right fit too. So you don't want to be just jumping into things that you think are a quick fix and that really are not.
Well, and one thing too that I've learned is anytime I've sent somebody to talk to you or to Lisa, sometimes I'll get a call back that are like, well, they said I don't really need them, and here's why. And I was like, if they don't think
Yeah.
that you need to do this, then that is 1000% the advice that I would give or I would have you take. And it's because, and I say this to people when I say, make an appointment because they're not going to lie to you and say, hey, let's take a look at it and then we'll decide if we're going to work.
Mhm.
Like nobody has time. Like if it's a waste of your time and their time, and if they really can't make it work, like to me, who else are you going to find to make it work? Like I would be very suspicious.
Yeah.
So you've always been the barometer of like the honest
Oh,
conversation.
thank you.
Well, because I've heard people go, I'm so shocked. They said that it wouldn't be a good idea. And here they are like pumping themselves up to participate. But I also know that there's been conversations I've had with doctors who are like, I need to open up another location and we're so busy and we need to add this and add that. And then I say to them, have you thought about dropping? And it's like they don't, like that doesn't even enter their thought process.
Mhm.
They're just in this, everybody has multiple locations, everybody
Right.
has multiple associates. It's almost like this, that's the new standard of success. And it's not for everybody. More employees means you, doctor, had to be more of a manager of your manager, even. And it's
Yes.
like, man, that's the stuff that none of these dentists wanted to do. None
Yeah.
of them. So why would you do
No.
it?
And I think we are starting to see that trend switch a little bit too, where more dentists are saying, and partly just because they're being required to do hygiene, like you were saying in some cases. And so they're sort of seeing a forced shrink of staff. It wasn't their intent, but
Hmm.
if you can't find a hygienist to hire, you just have to make do. And then they're starting to realize, okay, maybe in some ways smaller is a better fit. Not for
Yeah.
everybody, but it for people who don't like to manage and they're wanting to keep things on the smaller, less complicated side, it's sometimes a good choice.
Well, and you and I have both worked with offices where they pretty much, even when they opened up their first one, like they already had 4 or 5 planned out.
Yes.
Like, and we're just like, you want to do what? Like,
Yeah.
and in year 3, I'll be opening up
Right.
this third location. And I'm just like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about? Let's get to first office.
Yes. Yes. There are definitely some people out there who have mapped out the business side of dentistry very well from the get-go. So
Yeah. And then here comes COVID and here comes
yeah,
hygiene
right.
shortage and here comes this, it's crazy. So,
Yeah.
all right. I knew we were going to like go to the top because honestly, we could talk for hours and I bet that there'd be people that would listen for hours, but in the interest of time, because
We're
we're going
not
to
that
have to.
exciting. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's
no,
fine.
actually, I'm telling you, there's going to people that are going to, drop a note in the YouTube comment. If you were completely geeked out by this, let us know because I'm guessing that there are quite a few that will be. So it can't just be us that like talking about
I
this stuff,
know.
Sandy.
I
And if
know.
so, then thank God we found each other.
I know.
So, Sandy, how can they reach you and Lisa, and how can they read more of what you have to say?
Yeah, well, we're on Facebook, Unlock the PPO. That's really, that and Dentaltown are the only places. And then your revenue.
Dental Revenue Network, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you a dental biller feeling overwhelmed and isolated? I get it. The world of revenue cycle management is complex and ever-changing. That's why I created Dental Revenue Network. Our membership community was created to help you become a better revenue cycle manager and small business operator. Say goodbye to feeling alone and hello to a supportive community of dental billing professionals. Here's what you'll get: monthly billing-focused meetings with peers and experts, business building sessions to elevate your career, resource libraries tailored for billers and billing company owners, introductions to cutting-edge RCM technologies and companies, and a vibrant community for networking and support. Ready to transform your dental billing experience? Visit dentalrevenuenetwork.com today. Don't wait. Join us now and navigate the business of RCM with confidence.
Find us any of those places. We are not in the Facebook groups. That's just too much for me to stay on top of all of the. There's a little crazy out there with some of that. And I'm not in the business of arguing with people if they're doing it right or wrong. And so just, come find our page if you want any updates. We try to be very generous with sharing information. And then our website's unlocktheppo.com. And we actually just launched our brand new website last weekend. We were a little dated for sure. And so we have a brand new website. So definitely come check us out there.
I'm going to go check that out. I didn't know that had launched yet. I'm
Give
going to
me
go
some
definitely
feedback because it really just went live a week ago today, I think. So
I will. I'm good with feedback. So
be critical. I'm tough. Be critical. Give me any feedback. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Okay. So listeners, you really should take advantage of the resources because they are, like she said, they're generous with their information. And that's why they have such a loyal following. If I say unlock the PPO, I never get this. I always get this. Oh, I hear they're very good. That's what I hear. Right. So definitely follow them, pay attention to what they're saying. Join us over in Dental Revenue Network, and then definitely check out the ADRCC.com website. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that. So if you are somebody who is wanting to get into the best practices side of fee negotiations, this group, and you guys, this is like 2 or 3 years now. I know I went to one of your opening meetings, and it's been 2 or 3 years now that you guys have been doing this. And I think it's so overdue because there's a lot of weird characters out there doing this. So if you're in that space, definitely check them out and join them so that you can continue to help that part of the industry grow. And dear listeners, as always, I very much appreciate that you spend your time with us. Thank you.
We're all super busy, so thank you for making time for me today. The show notes will have any links that we referenced in the episode. You can also find links for my book, events, and my online insurance course, Dental Insurance Design and Management. I speak often around the country on management and insurance issues. Come hang out with me in one of my classes. I promise you'll laugh and learn.